The night air bit at my cheeks as I stepped out of my patrol car, the flashing red and blue lights casting eerie shadows across the empty highway. I'd been a highway patrol officer for 15 years, but something about this situation made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It was just past 2 a.m., and I'd spotted a sedan pulled over on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking weakly in the darkness. As I approached, I could make out a figure hunched over the open hood. Standard procedure dictated I offer assistance, but a nagging voice in the back of my mind whispered that something wasn't right. "Evening, sir," I called out, one hand resting casually on my holster. "Having some car trouble?" The man straightened up and I got my first good look at him. He was tall and lanky with a scraggly beard and eyes that darted nervously from me to the car and back again. His clothes were rumpled and stained, as if he'd been wearing them for days. "Yeah, officer," he replied, his voice hoarse. "Engine just died on me. I was hoping someone might come along to help." I nodded, taking a step closer to peer under the hood. "Mind if I take a look?" He shuffled to the side, allowing me access. As I leaned in, the acrid smell of burning oil hit my nostrils. Whatever was wrong with this car, it wasn't a simple fix. "How long have you been out here?" I asked, trying to keep my tone conversational as I scanned the engine compartment. "Couple hours, maybe?" he answered, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. Lost track of time, to be honest. I straightened up, my flashlight beam sweeping across the car's interior. That's when I noticed something odd. A blanket bunched up in the back seat, partially obscuring what looked like a pile of clothes. "You traveling alone?" I asked, my senses suddenly on high alert. The man's eyes widened slightly and he swallowed hard before answering, Yeah, just me." I nodded slowly, my gaze fixed on the back seat. "Mind if I take a look inside the car, just standard procedure?" He hesitated for a moment, then shrugged. "Sure, go ahead." As I moved towards the rear door, I could feel the tension radiating off him. My hand tightened on my flashlight as I reached for the door handle. The interior light flickered on as I opened the door, illuminating the jumble of blankets and clothing. I leaned in, my nose wrinkling at the musty odor. That's when I saw it, a pale hand reaching out from beneath the blanket. My heart rate spiked, and I instinctively reached for my weapon. "Sir, I need you to step back and put your hands where I can see them." Time seemed to slow as I turned to face the man, my hand now firmly gripping my gun. His expression had changed completely, the nervous energy replaced by a cold, calculating stare. "Officer," he said, his voice eerily calm, "I think you'd better come with me." In that moment, I realized I was facing a decision that could mean life or death. Not just for me, but for whoever was hidden under that blanket. I drew my weapon, leveling it at the man's chest. "On the ground now, hands behind your head." Instead of complying, he took a step towards me, his eyes glinting in the harsh glare of my flashlight. "You don't want to do this, officer. You have no idea what you're getting into." My radio crackled to life, startling us both. "Unit 17, what's your status?" Without taking my eyes off the suspect, I reached for my shoulder mic. "Dispatch, this is Unit 17. I've got a situation here. Possible kidnapping in progress. Send backup to my location immediately." The man's face contorted with rage. "You shouldn't have done that," he snarled, lunging towards me. I sidestepped, using his momentum to slam him against the car. "Don't move!" I shouted, struggling to maintain control as he thrashed beneath me. As we grappled, I heard a muffled cry from inside the vehicle. The hand beneath the blanket moved, grasping weakly at the air. "Help's coming," I called out, hoping my voice would reach whoever was trapped inside. "Just hold on." The man beneath me redoubled his efforts, nearly breaking free from my grip. I could feel my control slipping as we wrestled on the gravel shoulder. Suddenly, headlights appeared on the horizon, growing brighter by the second. The cavalry was arriving. With a burst of strength fueled by desperation, I managed to flip the suspect onto his stomach, wrenching his arms behind his back. As I snapped the handcuffs into place, I could hear the approaching sirens. "It's over," I panted, my chest heaving from the exertion. "You're under arrest." The man went limp beneath me, all the fight draining out of him. "You have no idea what you've done," he muttered, his voice muffled against the asphalt. As my backup arrived, lights flashing and sirens wailing, I stumbled to my feet. "Secure the suspect," I barked to the first officer on the scene. "There's someone in the back seat who needs help." I rushed back to the car, throwing open the rear door. Gently, I pulled back the blanket, revealing a young woman. her wrists and ankles bound with duct tape. Her eyes were wide with fear and confusion as she blinked in the sudden light. "It's okay," I said softly, reaching for my knife to cut her bonds. "You're safe now, we've got you." As I helped her sit up, I could see the marks of her ordeal etched across her face, bruises, tear-stained cheeks, and a look of utter exhaustion. She tried to speak, but her voice came out as a hoarse whisper. "Water," she managed to croak. One of the other officers rushed over with a bottle, and I helped her take small sips. "What's your name?" I asked gently. "Sarah," she replied, her voice stronger now. "Sarah Jennings. I thought I was going to die out here." I squeezed her hand reassuringly. "You're going to be okay, Sarah. We're going to get you to a hospital and contact your family." As the paramedics arrived and took over Sarah's care, I made my way back to where the suspect was being held. He was seated in the back of a patrol car, his expression a mixture of anger and resignation. "You have the right to remain silent," I began, reciting the Miranda warning. As I spoke, I couldn't help but wonder about the series of events that had led to this moment. What twisted path had brought this man to the point of abducting an innocent woman, and what would have happened if I hadn't stopped to investigate? The adrenaline that had been coursing through my veins began to subside, replaced by a bone-deep weariness. But as I watched Sarah being loaded into an ambulance, a warm blanket draped over her shoulders, I felt a surge of gratitude for the instincts that had guided me tonight. In the days that followed, the full story began to emerge. Sarah had been abducted from a parking lot 3 days earlier, taken by a man who had been stalking her for weeks. He had planned to take her across state lines to a remote cabin where he believed they could start a new life together. As I sat in the courtroom watching the suspect plead guilty to kidnapping and assault charges, I couldn't help but reflect on how close we had come to a very different outcome. If I had ignored my gut feeling, if I had simply offered some roadside assistance and moved on, Sarah might never have been found. The judge's gavel came down, pronouncing a sentence that would keep Sarah's abductor behind bars for decades. As the bailiff led him away, his eyes met mine for a brief moment. There was no remorse there, only a cold emptiness that sent a chill down my spine. Outside the courthouse, I found Sarah waiting with her family. The physical marks of her ordeal had faded, but I could see in her eyes that the emotional scars ran deep. "Officer Thompson," she said, stepping forward to greet me. I never really got to thank you properly." I shook my head, feeling somewhat uncomfortable with the gratitude. "I was just doing my job, Sarah." She smiled, a hint of her old self shining through. "Maybe, but your job saved my life. I'll never forget that." As I watched Sarah walk away, surrounded by the love and support of her family, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. In my 15 years on the force, I'd seen my fair share of darkness. But moments like these, moments where tragedy was averted, where lives were saved, these were the reasons I put on the badge every day. I climbed into my patrol car, ready to head back out onto the highway. As I pulled away from the curb, I found myself scanning the roadside, alert for any signs of trouble. Because out there, on the lonely stretches of asphalt that crisscrossed the country, you never knew when a routine traffic stop might turn into something far more sinister. And I'd be damned if I ever ignored my instincts again. Story 2. Here's a 1,500-word story based on idea number 9. The beam of my flashlight caught something metallic in the back seat, and my blood ran cold. What I saw in that car would haunt me for years to come. It was supposed to be a routine night patrol. As a highway patrol officer for the past 8 years, I'd seen my fair share of odd situations, but nothing could have prepared me for what I encountered on that moonless night in late October. I'd been cruising down a lonely stretch of Highway 61, the darkness broken only by my headlights and the occasional glimmer of reflective road markers. The clock on my dash read 2:17 a.m. when I spotted a sedan pulled over on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking weakly in the gloom. Standard procedure kicked in. I slowed down, flipped on my light bar, and pulled up behind the vehicle. It was an older model Chevy, dark blue with out-of-state plates. As I radioed in my location and the license plate number, I noticed there was only one occupant. The driver, a man who appeared to be in his mid-40s, balding with glasses. I stepped out of my cruiser, the crunch of gravel under my boots unnaturally loud in the still night air. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of decaying leaves and wood smoke from distant farmhouses. I approached the driver's side, one hand resting casually on my holster, a habit born of both training and experience. "Evening, sir," I said, my voice sounding oddly muffled in the darkness. "Having some car trouble." The man looked up at me, his face a mask of relief. "Oh, thank goodness," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I've got a flat tire and I can't seem to get the spare off. I've been stuck here for almost an hour." I nodded, shining my flashlight down at the rear tire. Sure enough, it was completely deflated. "All right, let's take a look at that spare. Pop the trunk and I'll see if I can help you out." As the man fumbled with the trunk release, I walked around to the back of the car. The trunk opened with a metallic groan, revealing a mess of luggage, fast food wrappers, and various road trip detritus. Buried beneath it all, I could just make out the edge of the spare tire well. "Looks like we'll need to clear some of this out," I said, already reaching for a duffel bag. "Mind if I move some of your stuff?" No, go right ahead," the man called back, his voice tight with what I assumed was embarrassment at the messy state of his car. I started shifting items, setting them carefully on the ground beside the car. As I worked, I kept up a steady stream of small talk, hoping to put the driver at ease. "Coming from out of state, huh? Vacation or business?" "Oh, a little of both," he replied, his voice oddly strained. "Visiting some family, might look into a job opportunity while I'm here." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me from where he sat. Something about his tone made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, but I couldn't put my finger on why. I dealt with plenty of nervous drivers before. Some people just get anxious around cops, even when they've done nothing wrong. Finally, I uncovered the spare tire and the jack. "All right, I think we're in business," I called out, hefting the tire. "Let's get you back on the road." I set to work, positioning the jack and starting to lift the car. The familiar routine was almost meditative, allowing my mind to wander. Something still felt off about this situation, but I couldn't quite place it. The driver's nervousness, the out-of-state plates, the messy car, none of it was particularly unusual on its own. But together it painted a picture that didn't quite add up. As I worked on replacing the tire, I found myself stealing glances at the car's interior through the windows. The front seat was cluttered with maps, coffee cups, and fast food bags, typical road trip stuff. But something about the back seat caught my eye. It was too dark to make out details, but there was an odd shape back there, covered by what looked like a blanket. I finished tightening the lug nuts and lowered the car back down. "All right, sir, you're all set," I said, wiping my hands on my uniform pants. "Mind if I just take a quick look at your license and registration?" The man's reaction was immediate and alarming. His whole body tensed, and I saw his knuckles whiten as he gripped the steering wheel. Is that really necessary, officer?" he stammered. "I mean, it was just a flat tire." Warning bells started going off in my head. I kept my voice calm and neutral, but my hand drifted closer to my weapon. "It's just standard procedure, sir. Nothing to worry about if everything's in order." He nodded jerkily, reaching for the glove compartment with trembling hands. As he fumbled with his paperwork, I casually shone my flashlight into the back seat, trying to get a better look at whatever was under that blanket. The beam caught something metallic, and my blood ran cold. Partially exposed by the shifting blanket was what appeared to be a length of chain, and next to it, unmistakably, the barrel of a gun. Time seemed to slow down. My heart pounded in my ears as I processed what I was seeing. The driver must have noticed where my light was pointing, because he suddenly froze, his eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror. For a moment, we were both perfectly still, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Then everything happened at once. The driver lunged for the center console as I drew my weapon, shouting, "Police, don't move!" The car engine roared to life, tires spinning on the loose gravel of the shoulder. I jumped back, narrowly avoiding being clipped by the rear bumper as the Chevy fishtailed onto the highway. "Dispatch, I've got a 1080 blue Chevy sedan heading northbound on Highway 61, I barked into my radio as I sprinted for my cruiser. Driver fled during a traffic stop, possible weapons and kidnapping situation. I threw myself into the driver's seat, flipping on my sirens as I peeled out after the fleeing vehicle. The Chevy was already a good quarter mile ahead, its taillights growing smaller by the second. I pushed my cruiser to its limits, the engine howling as I gained ground. My mind raced as fast as my car. Who or what was in that back seat? Was this a kidnapping in progress? A drug run gone wrong? The possibilities were endless and terrifying. I knew I had to stop this car, and soon, before we hit more populated areas where bystanders could get hurt. The chase continued for miles, the Chevy swerving dangerously across both lanes of the empty highway. I noticed with grim satisfaction that the new tire I'd just put on was holding up, at least. Small victories. Suddenly, the Chevy's brake lights flared. The car skidded sideways, leaving twin streaks of rubber on the asphalt as it spun once, twice, before coming to rest facing the wrong way on the shoulder. I slammed on my own brakes, stopping about 50 yards away. "Driver, exit the vehicle with your hands up," I shouted, taking cover behind my open car door, weapon drawn. "Do it now!" For a long moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, the driver's side door opened. The man emerged, his hands raised, face pale in the harsh glare of my headlights. "Don't shoot," he called out, his voice breaking. "Please, I can explain." "Walk towards me slowly," I commanded, keeping my gun trained on him. "Any sudden moves and I will fire. Do you understand?" He nodded, taking halting steps in my direction. As he got closer, I could see he was crying, tears streaking down his face. "I'm sorry," he kept saying over and over. "I'm so sorry." When he was about 10 feet away, I ordered him to his knees. "Cross your ankles, put your hands behind your head, and interlock your fingers," I instructed, moving forward to handcuff him. The whole time, I kept glancing at the Chevy, half expecting someone to jump out of the back seat. Once the driver was secured, I approached the car cautiously, my heart in my throat. The driver had left his door open, and I could hear something now, a muffled sobbing coming from the back seat. I yanked open the rear door, my flashlight illuminating the interior. What I saw made my stomach lurch. A young woman, probably in her early 20s, was curled up on the floor, her wrists and ankles bound with chains. A strip of duct tape covered her mouth, but her eyes were wide and terrified, pleading silently for help. "It's okay," I said softly, holstering my weapon and reaching for my radio. "You're safe now. I'm going to get you out of here." As I called for backup and an ambulance, I couldn't stop my hands from shaking. In all my years on the force, I'd never come so close to letting a monster slip away. If I hadn't noticed that chain in the back seat, if I hadn't trusted my instincts when something felt off, I shuddered to think what might have happened. The night air was filled with the wail of approaching sirens as I helped the young woman out of the car. She clung to me, sobbing with relief as red and blue lights appeared on the horizon. I held her gently, murmuring reassurances, all the while keeping a watchful eye on the handcuffed driver. As my fellow officers arrived on the scene, I knew this night was far from over. There would be statements to take, evidence to process, a suspect to interrogate. But for now, in this moment, I allowed myself to feel a profound sense of gratitude. A routine traffic stop had turned into something much darker, but thanks to luck, training, and intuition, a life had been saved. I watched as the paramedics wrapped a shock blanket around the young woman's shoulders, and I knew that no matter what else happened in my career, I would never forget this night. The night a flat tire led to a rescue. Story 3. The neon sign of the 24-hour diner flickered, casting an eerie glow on the rain-slicked streets. I zipped up my jacket, shivering against the late October chill. My phone buzzed, another order. I sighed, glancing at the clock. 11:47 p.m. Just one more delivery before I could call it a night. I'm Leo, and this is my glamorous life as a motorcycle food courier in the city that never sleeps. Most nights, it's a blur of steaming pizza boxes and impatient customers. But tonight was about to take a turn I never saw coming. The order details popped up on my screen. The destination made me pause. 1255 Warehouse Row. I frowned, my thumb hovering over the Accept button. That address was deep in the industrial district, a maze of abandoned factories and sketchy lots. Not exactly prime real estate for a late-night snack run, but rent was due next week and my bank account was looking grim. With a resigned sigh, I hit accept and kick-started my bike. The rumble of my motorcycle echoed off empty buildings as I navigated the deserted streets. Streetlights were few and far between here, leaving pockets of inky darkness between pools of sickly yellow light. A cold drizzle started to fall, beating on my visor and blurring my vision. As I turned onto Warehouse Row, an unsettling quiet settled over me. No cars, no pedestrians, not even the usual stray cats that prowled these alleys. Just row after row of hulking, silent buildings looming on either side. I slowed as I approached number 1255, squinting through the rain. The building was a massive concrete structure, windows boarded up, a faded "for lease" sign hanging crookedly by the loading dock. But something caught my eye: fresh tire tracks leading into the cavernous entrance of the loading bay. My instincts screamed at me to turn around, to cancel the order and head home. But curiosity and the promise of a decent tip got the better of me. I pulled up to the entrance, killing the engine. The silence that followed was oppressive. I could hear my own heartbeat quickening with each passing second. I pulled out my phone, double-checking the order details. No special instructions, just an ordinary burger and fries combo. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing in the vast, empty space. "Food delivery?" No response, just the soft patter of rain and the distant wail of a siren. I swallowed hard, fighting the urge to bolt. Maybe they were just running late. I'd give it 5 more minutes, then I was out of here. As I waited, I noticed something odd. The tire tracks I'd seen earlier, they didn't just lead into the warehouse. They crisscrossed the floor as if someone had been driving in circles inside the building. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the damp night air. What the hell was going on here? Just as I was about to call it quits, a flicker of movement caught my eye deep within the warehouse, a shadow darting between rusted machinery. "Hey!" I shouted, taking a few steps forward. "I've got your order here." Silence, then barely audible over the rain footsteps, coming closer. My heart pounded in my chest as a figure emerged from the darkness. A man, tall and lean, wearing a hood that obscured most of his face. "You're late," he said, his voice gravelly and low. I forced a nervous laugh. "Traffic, you know how it is. That'll be $23.50. He made no move to take the food or pay. Instead, he cocked his head to the side, studying me. "You're not the usual guy." A bead of cold sweat trickled down my back. No, just covering a shift." "Look, man, I don't want any trouble. Just take the food and we can both get on with our nights, yeah?" The man chuckled, a sound devoid of any real humor. "Oh, I'm afraid it's not that simple, Leo." My blood ran cold. I never told him my name. Before I could react, 2 more figures materialized from the shadows, flanking the first man. They were built like linebackers, faces set in grim expressions. "What is this?" I stammered, taking a step back. "Look, if this is about the food, just take it, no charge." The first man shook his head slowly. "This isn't about the food, Leo. This is about you being in the wrong place at the wrong time." I turned to run, but my feet seemed rooted to the spot. Fear paralyzed me as the 2 larger men advanced. Just as they were about to reach me, a cacophony of sirens split the air. Red and blue lights flooded the warehouse entrance. "Police! Everybody freeze!" Oh. The next few minutes were a blur of shouting, scuffling, and the metallic click of handcuffs. I found myself seated on the back of an ambulance, a shock blanket draped over my shoulders, trying to make sense of what had just happened. A detective approached, notepad in hand. "Mr. Reeves, I'm Detective Sanchez. Think you're up for answering a few questions?" I nodded numbly, still processing the night's events. "Do you have any idea what you stumbled into tonight?" Sanchez asked, his expression grave. I shook my head. I was just making a delivery. I don't understand any of this." Sanchez sighed, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. "What you stumbled into, Mr. Reeves, was a sting operation 6 months in the making. We've been tracking a major drug trafficking ring operating out of these warehouses. Tonight was supposed to be the big bust." My eyes widened as the implications sank in. "But the food order?" "A cover," Sanchez explained. "Our undercover officer was supposed to make the delivery, the signal to move in. When you showed up instead..." He trailed off, shaking his head. "They would have killed me," I whispered, the reality of how close I'd come to death finally hitting me. Sanchez nodded solemnly. "Most likely. But your unexpected arrival actually worked in our favor. It threw them off balance, gave us the opening we needed." I let out a shaky breath, running my hands through my hair. "So what happens now?" "Now," Sanchez said, closing his notepad. "You go home and get some rest. We'll need you to come in tomorrow to give a formal statement, and Mr. Reeves?" He fixed me with a serious look. You might want to consider a different line of work. As I rode home that night, the city looked different. Shadows seemed deeper, alleyways more menacing. Every passing car made me flinch, half expecting to see those men from the warehouse. I couldn't shake the feeling that my life had irreversibly changed. The veil of normalcy had been pulled back, revealing a world far more dangerous than I'd ever imagined. A world where a simple food delivery could be the difference between life and death. Sleep eluded me that night. I tossed and turned, replaying the events at the warehouse over and over. What if the police hadn't shown up when they did? What if I'd arrived a few minutes earlier or later? The possibilities haunted me. As dawn broke, I made a decision. I couldn't go back to the way things were, pretending the night was just like any other. I'd been given a second chance, and I wasn't going to waste it. I called my boss and quit on the spot. Then I pulled out the business card Detective Sanchez had given me. My hand shook slightly as I dialed the number. Detective Sanchez? It's Leo Reeves. I've been thinking about what you said last night about considering a different line of work. I took a deep breath, steeling my resolve. I want to help, whatever it takes, whatever I need to do. I want to make sure what almost happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else. There was a pause on the other end of the line, then, "Come down to the station, Leo, let's talk." As I hung up the phone, I felt a mix of fear and excitement coursing through me. My life as I knew it was over, but maybe, just maybe, I had found my true calling. The neon sign of the diner still flickered as I passed it on my way to the police station. But this time I saw it differently. Not as a beacon for late-night cravings, but as a reminder of the thin line between the world we think we know and the one that lurks in the shadows. I had crossed that line, and there was no going back. The city that never sleeps had shown me its true face, and I was ready to face it head-on. Story 4. The cargo container shuddered, and a muffled thump echoed through my cab. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white. Whatever was back there, it definitely wasn't the electronics I'd been told I was hauling. My name's Mike, and I've been a long-haul trucker for the better part of 2 decades. I've seen my share of weird stuff on the road, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened on that muggy July night in the middle of nowhere, Oklahoma. It started like any other job. I'd gotten a call from my dispatcher, Cheryl, about a last-minute gig. "High-priority shipment," she'd said. "Electronics. Good pay, but it's got to be there yesterday." I'd been about to start my mandatory rest period, but the promise of a fat paycheck was too tempting to pass up. The pickup point was a nondescript warehouse on the outskirts of Tulsa. As I pulled up, I noticed there wasn't a single company logo or sign anywhere on the building. Just a gray concrete box with a loading dock. Red flag number 1. A couple of guys in polo shirts and khakis were waiting for me. They looked more like mid-level office managers than warehouse workers. Red flag number 2. "You Henderson?" one of them asked, squinting at me in the late afternoon sun. I nodded, climbing down from my rig. "That's me, here for the electronics shipment to Chicago." They exchanged a look I couldn't quite read. "Right, the electronics," the second man said, a beat too late. "It's all loaded up and ready to go. We just need you to sign here." He thrust a clipboard at me. "Now, I've been in this business long enough to know you always check the cargo before you sign. But when I made a move towards the back of the truck, the first guy stepped in front of me. "No need for that," he said, his tone casual but his eyes hard. "We've triple-checked everything. It's all secure. Red flag number 3, but by this point, I was starting to get a sinking feeling in my gut. These weren't the kind of guys you argued with if you wanted to keep all your teeth. So against my better judgment, I scrawled my signature on the form. "Great," the second man said, all business now. "You're on a tight schedule, so you'd better get moving. And, don't make any unnecessary stops, all right?" I climbed back into my cab, a cold sweat breaking out on the back of my neck despite the summer heat. As I pulled away from the warehouse, I caught a glimpse of the 2 men in my side mirror. They were watching me go, faces grim. For the first hour or so, everything seemed normal. I hit the highway and settled into the familiar rhythm of the road. The sun set in a blaze of orange and pink, and soon I was driving through the velvety darkness of the Oklahoma night, my headlights cutting a path through the gloom. It was somewhere around midnight when I first heard it. A thump, so faint I thought I might have imagined it. I turned down the radio, straining my ears. For a few minutes, nothing. Then, just as I was about to chalk it up to an overactive imagination, I heard it again, louder this time, definitely coming from the cargo container. My heart started racing. What the hell had I gotten myself into? I thought about pulling over, but the warning from the warehouse guys echoed in my head. Don't make any unnecessary stops. Besides, I was in the middle of nowhere. If there was something dangerous back there, I'd be a sitting duck, so I kept driving, my eyes flicking constantly to the mirrors, half expecting to see flashing lights at any moment. The noises from the container grew more frequent. Thumps, scrapes, and once, I swear I heard what sounded like a muffled voice. I was nearing the Oklahoma-Kansas border when things really went sideways. A particularly loud bang came from the container, followed by a series of thuds that I realized with dawning horror sounded like footsteps. Something was moving around back there, something big. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely keep the truck straight. I needed to stop, consequences be damned. I spotted a sign for a rest area coming up and made a split-second decision. I flicked on my turn signal and began to decelerate. That's when all hell broke loose. The entire truck shuddered as something slammed against the side of the container. Again and again, like whatever was in there was trying to break out. The trailer swayed dangerously, and I fought to keep control as I pulled into the rest area. I barely had the truck in park before I was out of the cab, fumbling with my phone to call 911. But as I raised the phone to my ear, I froze. The noises from the container had stopped. The sudden silence was somehow even more terrifying than the commotion had been. For a long moment, I stood there in the empty parking lot, the only sound the faint buzz of the overhead lights and the ticking of the cooling engine. Then slowly I heard a new noise, a scraping metallic sound coming from the rear of the container. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to jump back in the cab and floor it. But a morbid curiosity kept me rooted to the spot. I had to know what was back there. With trembling steps, I made my way to the back of the trailer. The scraping sound grew louder. As I reached for the latch, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The security seal had already been broken. I hesitated, my hand on the latch. This was it, the point of no return. Whatever was on the other side of this door, my life would never be the same after I opened it. Taking a deep breath, I pulled the latch and swung the door open. The stench hit me first, a musty, animalistic smell that made my eyes water. As my vision adjusted to the darkness inside the container, I saw movement. Something large shifted in the shadows. Then it stepped into the light, and I felt the world tilt sideways. It was an elephant. A goddamn elephant. And not just any elephant. This one was clearly old, its gray skin hanging in loose folds, its tusks yellowed and chipped. It blinked at me with rheumy eyes, looking as confused as I felt. "What the fuck?" I whispered, my voice hoarse. The elephant let out a low rumble, swaying slightly on its feet. Now that the initial shock was wearing off, I could see that the poor thing looked exhausted and dehydrated. There were chains around its legs, giving it just enough slack to take a few steps, but not enough to move freely. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. Illegal animal trafficking? Some kind of twisted circus act? Whatever it was, I knew I was in way over my head. Just then, my phone buzzed in my pocket, making me jump. With shaking hands, I pulled it out. A text from an unknown number. "We know you've stopped. Keep driving or there will be consequences." I looked back at the elephant, then at my phone, then back at the elephant. In that moment, I made a decision that would change the course of my life forever. "Fuck it," I muttered, and dialed 911. The next few hours passed in a blur. Police cars and animal control vehicles swarmed the rest stop. I told my story over and over to various officials, watching as they carefully coaxed the elephant out of the container and into a special transport vehicle. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in pale pinks and golds, a detective approached me. "Mr. Henderson," he said, his face grave. "I'm afraid this goes a lot deeper than just animal smuggling. We're going to need to place you in protective custody." I nodded numbly, watching as the elephant, now safely secured and being tended to by a vet, trumpeted softly in the distance. Whatever came next, whatever danger I might be in, I knew I'd made the right choice. As I climbed into the back of a police cruiser, I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. All those years on the road, all the strange things I'd seen, and it took an elephant in a box to finally show me that sometimes The craziest things in life are hidden right behind a simple metal door. The cruiser pulled away from the rest stop, and I watched my truck, my home for so many years, disappear in the side mirror. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I'd never look at a routine shipment the same way again. Story 5. The open road stretched before us like an endless ribbon of possibility, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. It was supposed to be the start of our new life together. Instead, it became a nightmare that would haunt us long after the last mile marker faded in our rearview mirror. My name's Jack, and this is the story of how a cross-country road trip with my fiancée Emma turned into a terrifying game of cat and mouse with an unseen pursuer. We'd been on the road for 3 days, our little Honda Civic packed to the brim with everything we owned. The plan was simple: drive from our tiny apartment in Boston to our new home in San Francisco, where promising job offers awaited us both. A fresh start, a chance to build our life together from the ground up. The first couple of days were exactly what we'd hoped for, singing along to our favorite songs, stopping at quirky roadside attractions, and talking for hours about our dreams for the future. But as we crossed into Nebraska on that third day, something changed. It started with a feeling, a prickle on the back of my neck that I couldn't shake. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, unable to escape the sensation that we were being watched. "You okay, babe?" Emma asked, looking up from her book. "You seem tense." I forced a smile, not wanting to worry her. "Just a little road fatigue, I think. How about we stop at the next rest area?" She nodded, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "Sounds good. I could use a stretch myself." As we pulled into the rest stop, I scanned the parking lot. It was fairly empty, just a couple of semis and a few cars scattered about. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but that nagging feeling persisted. We used the restrooms and grabbed some snacks from the vending machines. As we walked back to our car, I noticed a blue sedan parked a few spaces down. Something about it caught my attention, but I couldn't put my finger on why. Back on the highway, I tried to relax, telling myself I was just being paranoid. But an hour later, as I checked the mirrors again, my heart skipped a beat. There it was, the blue sedan, about 5 car lengths behind us. "Em," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "does that car behind us look familiar to you?" She turned in her seat, peering through the rear window. "The blue one? I don't think so." "Why?" I swallowed hard. "I think I saw it at the rest stop, and I have a weird feeling it's been following us for a while." Emma's brow furrowed. "Are you sure it could just be someone heading in the same direction?" I nodded, not entirely convinced. "Yeah, you're probably right, just my imagination running wild." But as the miles ticked by, the blue sedan remained a constant presence. No matter how many times I changed lanes or adjusted our speed, it was always there, maintaining the same distance. The sun had long since set, leaving us in a world of headlights and shadows. Emma had dozed off, her head resting against the window. I was alone with my growing paranoia, every passing mile ratcheting up my anxiety. I decided to test my theory. At the next exit, I abruptly turned off, not even bothering to signal. My heart pounded as I watched the rearview mirror. For a moment, I thought we'd lost them. Then, at the last second, the blue sedan swerved across 2 lanes of traffic to follow us. "Shit," I muttered, my hands tightening on the steering wheel. Emma stirred, blinking sleepily. "What's going on? Where are we?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice calm. "Em, I need you to listen to me carefully. That car I mentioned earlier, it's definitely following us." She sat up straight, fully awake now. "What, are you sure?" I nodded grimly. "Positive. They've been behind us for hours, and they just followed us off a random exit." Fear flickered across Emma's face. "What do we do?" "I'm going to try to lose them," I said, accelerating as we reached the end of the off-ramp. "Keep an eye on them, and let me know if they're getting closer." I turned onto a dark county road, pushing our little Civic faster than I'd ever dared before. Emma twisted in her seat, watching our pursuer. "They're still there," she reported, her voice tight with fear. "Jack, they're gaining on us." My mind raced, trying to formulate a plan. We were in the middle of nowhere, no idea where the nearest town might be. Our cell phones showed no signal. We were completely on our own. Suddenly, Emma gasped. "Jack, look out!" I snapped my attention back to the road just in time to see a deer bounding across our path. I swerved hard, narrowly avoiding a collision. The car fishtailed, and for a heart-stopping moment I thought we were going to flip. Somehow I managed to regain control, bringing us to a stop on the shoulder. We sat there for a moment, both of us breathing heavily. Then Emma grabbed my arm. "Jack, they're stopping." Sure enough, the headlights of the blue sedan were growing brighter as it slowed behind us. Panic surged through me. "Lock the doors," I ordered, fumbling for my phone. Still no signal. The sedan came to a stop about 20 feet behind us. We watched, terrified, as the driver's door opened. A figure stepped out, backlit by the headlights, so we couldn't make out any features. "What do they want?" Emma whispered, her nails digging into my arm. I shook my head at a loss for words. My mind raced through possible scenarios, each more terrifying than the last. Were they carjackers, kidnappers, something even worse? The figure took a step towards our car, then another. I reached for the gear shift, ready to floor it the moment they got too close. Suddenly, a new set of headlights appeared on the horizon, growing rapidly brighter. The approaching vehicle slowed as it neared us, and I felt a surge of relief as I recognized the distinctive shape of a police cruiser. The figure from the blue sedan froze, then quickly retreated to their car. By the time the police car pulled up alongside us, the sedan was already speeding away into the night. A young officer approached our window, shining his flashlight inside. "Everything all right here, folks?" I rolled down the window, my hands shaking. "Officer, thank God, we were being followed. That car that just left, they've been tailing us for hours." The officer's expression turned serious. "Can you describe the vehicle?" As I gave him the details, he radioed them into dispatch. After taking our statement and checking our IDs, he insisted on escorting us to the nearest town. "We'll put out an APB on that sedan," he assured us. "In the meantime, I'd recommend you folks find a place to stay for the night. You've had quite a scare." We followed the cruiser to a small motel on the outskirts of a town whose name I couldn't even remember. As we checked in, the events of the night finally caught up with me. My legs felt like jelly, and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. In our room, Emma and I held each other tightly, neither of us speaking for a long time. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving us both exhausted and shell-shocked. "What do you think they wanted?" Emma finally asked, her voice muffled against my chest. I shook my head. "I don't know, and I'm not sure I want to know." We didn't sleep much that night, jumping at every sound outside our room. When morning came, we debated whether to continue our journey or turn back. In the end, we decided to press on. We wouldn't let fear derail our dreams. As we got back on the highway, I couldn't help but scan every car we passed, half expecting to see that blue sedan again. It never appeared, but the memory of that night lingered, a shadow at the edges of our vision. Our cross-country trip had started as an adventure, a journey towards our future. Instead, it became a stark reminder of how quickly the familiar can turn foreign, how the open road can become a trap. We made it to San Francisco eventually, but something had changed. We were more cautious, more aware of our surroundings. The innocence of our early relationship had been replaced by a hard-earned wisdom about the unpredictability of life. Even now, years later, I still find myself checking the rearview mirror more often than necessary. And sometimes, on long drives, I swear I can see a pair of headlights in the distance, always maintaining the same steady pace behind us. The open road still calls to us occasionally, but now we answer with a mix of excitement and trepidation. Because we know that sometimes the journey isn't just about reaching your destination. Sometimes it's about surviving the trip. Story 6. The cashier's smile never reached her eyes as she handed me the room key. "Enjoy your stay," she said, her voice as cold and lifeless as the howling wind outside. That's when I knew we'd made a terrible mistake coming to this truck stop. My name's Sarah, and what was supposed to be a fun family road trip turned into the most terrifying night of our lives. It all started when my husband Dave decided we should drive to his parents' place for Christmas instead of flying. "It'll be an adventure," he said. "The kids will love it." Yeah, right. We were somewhere in the middle of North Dakota when the blizzard hit. One minute we were cruising along, singing along to cheesy Christmas songs, and the next we could barely see 2 feet in front of us. The wind howled like a wounded animal, pelting our minivan with snow and sleet. "Dad, I'm scared," whispered Emily, our 8-year-old, from the back seat. Her brother, 12-year-old Tyler, tried to act tough, but I could see the worry in his eyes. Dave's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "It's okay, sweetie," he said, his voice tense. We'll find somewhere to stop soon." As if on cue, a sign loomed out of the swirling snow. "Big Rig Oasis, next exit." We'd passed dozens of truck stops on our journey, but never had one looked so inviting. Dave took the exit, the van fishtailing slightly on the slick road. As we pulled into the parking lot, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The place was huge, a sprawling complex with a motel attached to the main truck stop building. Neon signs advertising hot food and warm beds glowed like beacons in the storm. "See, told you we'd find a place," Dave said, trying to sound cheerful. But as we got out of the van, the wind nearly knocking us off our feet, I couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. The main building was warm and brightly lit, a stark contrast to the raging storm outside, but something felt off. The place was packed with stranded travelers, yet it was eerily quiet. No chatter, no laughter, just the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the distant rumble of idling truck engines. We approached the front desk where a middle-aged woman with a severe bun and horn-rimmed glasses regarded us coolly. Her name tag read Marge. "We need a room for the night," Dave said, flashing his most charming smile. "Got anything available?" Marge's expression didn't change. "You're in luck," she said, her voice flat. "We have one family room left. It'll be $89.99. As Dave handed over his credit card, I glanced around the lobby. That's when I noticed something strange. Everyone, the other travelers, the staff, even the truckers, hunched over cups of coffee. They were all watching us. Not overtly, but out of the corners of their eyes. And their faces. They all had the same blank expression as Marge. "Enjoy your stay," Marge said as she handed us the key, her lifeless eyes boring into mine. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold outside. Our room was at the far end of the motel, as far from the main building as possible. As we trudged through the snow, lugging our overnight bags, the wind seemed to whisper warnings in my ear. The room itself was unremarkable. 2 queen beds, a small TV, faded floral wallpaper, but it was warm and dry, and after the harrowing drive, it felt like a luxury suite. "See, this isn't so bad," Dave said as he helped the kids get settled. "We'll get a good night's sleep and be back on the road in the morning." I tried to share his optimism, but that nagging feeling of wrongness wouldn't leave me. "I'm going to grab some snacks from the vending machine," I said. "Anyone want anything?" The vending machine was in a small alcove near the motel office. As I fed my dollar bills into the machine, I overheard voices coming from the partially open office door. "Can't keep this up much longer," a man's voice said, low and urgent. "People are starting to notice." "We don't have a choice," replied a woman. It sounded like Marge from the front desk. "You know what'll happen if we don't play along?" "But the children..." "Shh! Someone's out there." I quickly grabbed my snacks and hurried back to our room, my heart pounding. What the hell was going on here? When I got back, Dave was channel surfing while the kids bickered over who got which bed. Everything seemed normal, but I couldn't shake the dread building in my gut. "Hey," Dave said, noticing my expression. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I hesitated. Should I tell him about what I'd overheard? Would he even believe me? "I'm fine," I lied. "Just tired from the drive." As the night wore on, things got progressively weirder. The TV only seemed to play old sitcoms from the 50s, no matter what channel we turned to. The tap water had a strange, metallic taste, and every so often I could swear I heard footsteps outside our door, even though a glance through the peephole showed an empty hallway. Around midnight, Emily woke up crying from a nightmare. As I comforted her, I noticed Tyler staring out the window, his face pale. "Tyler? What's wrong?" I asked. He turned to me, his eyes wide. "The people," he whispered. "They're all just standing out there." I rushed to the window, my heart in my throat. Sure enough, in the parking lot below, illuminated by the harsh glow of the floodlights, were at least 24 people. They stood perfectly still, facing our room, their features obscured by the swirling snow. "Dave!" I hissed, shaking my husband awake. "Dave! We need to leave. Now!" He blinked at me groggily. "What? Sarah, it's the middle of the night." "And the storm. Look outside," I said, my voice trembling. Dave peered out the window and I saw the color drain from his face. What the hell? Just then, there was a knock at the door. We all froze. "Housekeeping," called a sing-song voice that was far too cheerful for the middle of the night. Dave motioned for us to be quiet as he approached the door. He looked through the peephole, then stumbled back, his face ashen. "What is it?" I whispered. It's Marge," he said. But her face, it's not right. The knocking came again, more insistent this time. "We know you're awake in there," Marge's voice called, all pretense of cheerfulness gone. "It's time to join us, all of you." Emily started to whimper, and I clamped a hand over her mouth. Tyler was shaking, his eyes darting between us and the door. "Fire escape," Dave mouthed, pointing to the window. As quietly as we could, we grabbed our coats and shoes. The knocking at the door had turned into pounding now, the wood starting to splinter. Dave forced the window open, wincing at the shriek of rusted metal. The fire escape was ice cold and slippery, but it was our only way out. "Go, go," Dave urged, helping Emily out first, then Tyler. I followed, my fingers numb as I gripped the icy railing. Just as Dave was climbing out, the door burst open. I'll never forget the sight of Marge standing there, her face twisted into an inhuman grin, her eyes gleaming with a predatory light. "You can't escape," she hissed, lunging for Dave. But he was already through the window, slamming it shut behind him. We clambered down the fire escape as fast as we dared, the metal groaning ominously beneath us. As we reached the ground, I saw that the crowd in the parking lot had noticed us. As one, they turned and began shambling in our direction, their movements jerky and unnatural. "The van!" Dave yelled, fumbling for the keys. We ran through the snow, our breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind us, I could hear the sound of pursuit and strange, guttural noises that no human throat should be able to make. Dave got the van started on the second try, the engine roaring to life. We piled in and he floored it, snow and gravel spraying from beneath the tires. As we fishtailed onto the highway, I looked back at the truck stop. The entire population of the place was pouring out of the buildings now, their distorted faces visible in the glow of the neon signs. And standing at the forefront, her arms raised to the stormy sky, was Marge. We drove through the night, the blizzard miraculously clearing as we put miles between us and that hellish truck stop. None of us spoke. We were too shaken by what we'd experienced. As the sun began to rise, painting the snow-covered fields in shades of pink and gold, Dave finally broke the silence. "So, I guess we're flying next Christmas." A hysterical laugh bubbled up in my throat, and soon we were all giggling, the tension of the night finally breaking. We never did figure out what exactly was going on at that truck stop. Maybe it was some kind of cult, or a mass hallucination brought on by carbon monoxide poisoning. Hell, maybe we all just went a little crazy from the storm. But one thing's for certain, I'll never look at a roadside rest stop the same way again. And if you're ever driving through North Dakota in a blizzard and see a sign for Big Rig Oasis, keep driving, no matter what. Story 7. The stench of diesel and stale coffee hung in the air as I made my nightly rounds through the truck stop. It was 3 a.m. and the place was a ghost town, save for the occasional rumble of an idling engine. That's when I first noticed the rig, a sleek black Peterbilt parked in the far corner of the lot. Little did I know that truck would haunt my dreams for months to come. My name's Marvin, and I've been working the graveyard shift at Big Rig's rest stop for going on 15 years now. I've seen it all, or so I thought. Truckers come and go, some staying for a quick nap, others lingering for days. But there was something different about this one. At first, I didn't think much of it. Truckers often catch extended shut-eye, especially during bad weather. But as the days ticked by, a sense of unease began to creep over me. No one had entered or left that truck. No lights, no movement, nothing. By the fourth day, my curiosity got the better of me. I approached the rig, my flashlight beam cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. The truck was immaculate, its black paint gleaming despite the layer of dust settling on it. The cab's curtains were drawn tight, offering no glimpse inside. I rapped my knuckles against the driver's side door. "Hello? Everything all right in there?" Silence. I tried again, louder this time. "This is Marvin from security. Just checking to make sure you're okay." Still nothing, not even a rustle of movement from inside. A chill ran down my spine, and it had nothing to do with the cool night air. Something wasn't right here. I'd seen my fair share of truckers who'd passed away in their sleep, occupational hazard of the job. But this felt different. I retreated to my office, debating whether to call the cops. But what would I tell them? That I had a bad feeling about a parked truck? They'd laugh me off the phone. Instead, I pulled up the security camera footage from the past few days. Hours ticked by as I scrutinized every frame, looking for any sign of movement around that truck. Nothing. It was as if it had materialized out of thin air and been abandoned. As my shift neared its end, I made one last circuit of the lot. The black Peterbilt loomed in the distance, bathed in the sickly yellow glow of the parking lot lights. I found myself drawn to it, like a moth to a flame. This time, as I approached, I noticed something I'd missed before. A faint, rhythmic thumping coming from inside the trailer. My heart raced as I pressed my ear against the cold metal. Thump, thump, thump. It was barely audible, but unmistakable. Something or someone was inside that trailer. I fumbled for my radio. "Jess, you there? I need you to call the police now." "What's going on, Marv?" Jess's sleepy voice crackled over the radio. "That truck that's been sitting here for days. I think there's someone trapped inside the trailer." There was a pause, then. "Are you sure? This isn't like that time you thought you saw Bigfoot by the dumpsters, is it?" I gritted my teeth. "Damn it, Jess, this is serious. Call the cops." As I waited for help to arrive, I paced around the truck, straining my ears for any other sounds. The thumping continued, steady and insistent. Was it cargo shifting around or something far more sinister? The wail of sirens pierced the early morning quiet. 2 patrol cars pulled into the lot, their lights painting everything in surreal flashes of red and blue. I quickly filled the officers in on the situation. They approached the truck cautiously, hands on their holsters. One of them, a burly guy with a thick mustache, pounded on the trailer door. "Police! Is anyone in there?" The thumping stopped abruptly. The officers exchanged glances. "We're going to need to open this up," Mustache said. "You got bolt cutters?" I nodded, jogging to the maintenance shed to retrieve them. When I returned, a small crowd had gathered. Curious truckers roused from their sleep by the commotion. With a grunt of effort, one of the officers snapped the lock on the trailer. The door swung open with an ominous creak. The beam of a powerful flashlight penetrated the darkness inside. What it revealed made my blood run cold. The trailer was packed with cages, and in those cages people, men, women, even a few children. They blinked in the sudden light, their faces gaunt and terrified. "Jesus Christ," one of the officers muttered. It was a human trafficking operation right under our noses. As the officers called for backup and began helping people out of the trailer, I stood there, frozen in shock. How long had this been going on? How many other trucks had passed through, carrying similar cargo? The next few hours were a blur of activity. More police arrived, along with paramedics and social workers. The victims were taken to the hospital for treatment. Reporters showed up, their cameras flashing as they clamored for details. As dawn broke, I found myself sitting on the curb, nursing a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. A detective approached, notepad in hand. "Mr. Johnson, I'm Detective Rivera. I'd like to ask you a few questions about what happened here tonight." I nodded numbly, still trying to process everything. "Can you walk me through how you discovered this?" Rivera asked. I recounted the events of the night, my voice hoarse from repeating the story to various officials. When I finished, Rivera jotted down a few notes. "You potentially saved a lot of lives tonight, Mr. Johnson," he said, his tone grave. "If you hadn't noticed that truck and investigated, who knows how long those people would have been trapped there." His words should have been comforting, but all I felt was a crushing sense of guilt. "I should have called sooner," I muttered. "I knew something was off days ago." Rivera shook his head. "Don't beat yourself up. You acted on your instincts, and that's what matters. We've been trying to crack this trafficking ring for months. Your call might have just given us the break we needed." As the detective walked away, I gazed across the parking lot. The black Peterbilt was now surrounded by crime scene tape, a team of forensics experts combing every inch of it for evidence. It no longer looked sleek and imposing. Now it just seemed sinister, a metal coffin on wheels. In the days that followed, the truck stop became the center of a media frenzy. Reporters camped out, hoping to catch a glimpse of the scene of the crime. Truckers swapped theories and rumors, each version more outlandish than the last. But for me, the job was never the same. Every truck that pulled in became an object of suspicion. Every closed curtain, every quiet rig set my nerves on edge. I found myself unable to sleep, haunted by the faces of those we'd found in the trailer. What about the ones we didn't find? How many had passed through before we caught on? A month after the incident, I handed in my resignation. I couldn't take the constant paranoia, the weight of responsibility. Every night felt like I was standing guard against an invisible enemy. As I packed up my locker on my last day, Jess approached me. "You sure about this, Marv? You're the best night manager we've ever had." I offered her a weak smile. "I'm sure. It's time for a change." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Well, for what it's worth, you're a hero in my book. Not many people would have done what you did." Her words stuck with me as I drove home that night. Maybe she was right. Maybe I had made a difference. But as I passed a line of semis on the highway, I couldn't help but wonder, how many secrets were those trucks carrying? How many lives hung in the balance, just out of sight? The open road would never look the same to me again. What was once a symbol of freedom and adventure had become a reminder of the darkness that can lurk behind closed doors. Or in this case, locked trailers. As I pulled into my driveway, I made a decision. I may have left the truck stop behind, but I wasn't done fighting. Tomorrow, I'd call Detective Rivera. Maybe there was a way I could help with the ongoing investigation, to use my experience to spot the signs others might miss. Because now I knew the truth. Sometimes the most dangerous cargo isn't listed on any manifest, and sometimes the most important job isn't the one you're paid to do, but the one you choose to take on. The black Peterbilt may have driven off into my rearview mirror, but its impact would steer the course of my life for years to come. And I was ready for the journey ahead, no matter where it might lead. Story 8. The roar of the engine behind me grew louder, drowning out even the wind rushing past my helmet. I risked a glance in my side mirror and my heart skipped a beat. The black SUV was gaining on me, its headlights burning like angry eyes in the gathering dusk. This was no longer just a delivery run, it was a race for my life. My name's Alex, and I've been a motorcycle courier in the city for the past 3 years. It's a job that requires nerves of steel, lightning-fast reflexes, and more than a little luck. But nothing in my experience could have prepared me for that fateful evening last October. The day had started like any other. I'd picked up a small package from a law firm downtown destined for a client in the suburbs. The lawyer who handed it over seemed nervous, his eyes darting around the office as he gave me the address. "This needs to get there tonight," he'd said, his voice barely above a whisper. No matter what. I should have known then that something was off, but the pay was good and I had bills to cover. So I nodded, tucked the package into my bag, and headed out. The ride out of the city was smooth enough. Traffic was light and my Kawasaki purred beneath me as I wove between cars. As I hit the winding roads leading into the hills, I started to relax. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. The air was crisp with the promise of autumn, carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke. That's when I first noticed the SUV. It was about a quarter-mile behind me, just far enough back that I might not have given it a second thought. But something about the way it moved caught my eye. It was keeping pace with me, matching my speed exactly, even as I navigated the twisting mountain roads. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cooling evening air. I twisted the throttle, picking up speed. The SUV accelerated smoothly, maintaining the distance between us. "Okay," I muttered to myself inside my helmet. "Let's see how you handle this." I leaned into the next curve, taking it faster than was strictly safe. My knee nearly brushed the asphalt as I cornered, the bike responding to my every move like an extension of my own body. As I straightened up, I glanced back. The SUV was still there, closer now. Its engine growled, echoing off the rock face to my left. My heart was pounding now, adrenaline flooding my system. This was no coincidence. They were after me, or more likely after what I was carrying. The next few miles were a blur of increasingly reckless maneuvers. I pushed my bike to its limits, taking curves at speeds that would make even veteran riders blanch. But no matter what I did, I couldn't shake my pursuer. As I rounded a particularly sharp bend, I saw my chance. There was a small turnout ahead, barely visible in the fading light. Without thinking, I cut across the oncoming lane, thankfully empty, and into the turnout, killing my engine and lights in one smooth motion. The SUV roared past, its driver apparently not expecting such a sudden move. For a moment, I allowed myself to hope that I'd lost them. Then I heard the screech of tires on asphalt. They were coming back. I had seconds to make a decision. The smart move would be to stay hidden, to let them pass by again and then make a break for it in the opposite direction. But something, call it curiosity or sheer pig-headedness, made me want to confront them. To find out what the hell was so important about this package that they'd chase me halfway up a mountain for it. The SUV pulled into the turnout, its headlights sweeping across me. I tensed, ready to kick my bike back to life and bolt if needed. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed all in black. Even in the dim light, I could see the outline of a holster under his jacket. "Hand over the package," he said, his voice gruff and authoritative. Now, I kept my helmet on, buying time as I assessed the situation. "What package?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He took a step forward, and I saw his hand move towards his hip. "Don't play dumb, kid. We know you've got it. Give it up and you can ride away. No harm, no foul. And if I don't?" His laugh was cold and humorless. "Then things get ugly." As if on cue, the passenger doors of the SUV opened. 2 more men got out, both as large and intimidating as the first. They spread out, effectively blocking any escape route. My mind raced. I could try to make a break for it, but the odds of outrunning a bullet weren't great. I could hand over the package, but something told me these guys wouldn't just let me go afterward. They'd seen my face, or at least my bike. I knew too much. That's when I made a decision that would change the course of my life. "All right," I said, slowly reaching into my courier bag. "You want the package? Come and get it." In one fluid motion, I revved the engine and dropped the clutch. The bike leaped forward, directly at the leader. He dove out of the way, cursing. I heard the distinctive sound of a gun being drawn, but I was already past them, fishtailing onto the road. The night air whipped past me as I opened up the throttle, pushing the bike harder than I ever had before. Behind me I heard car doors slamming, then the roar of the SUV's engine. What followed was the most intense ride of my life. The mountain road became a blur of hairpin turns and steep drops. I took risks I'd never even contemplated before, leaning so far into curves that my elbows nearly scraped the ground. The SUV was always there, sometimes falling back on the tightest turns, but inevitably catching up on the straighter stretches. I knew I couldn't keep this up forever. My bike was faster and more maneuverable, but they had the advantage of 4 wheels and a lot more weight. One mistake, one patch of loose gravel, and I'd be done for. As I rounded a bend, I saw salvation. A narrow dirt road branching off to the right, barely visible in the gloom. Without hesitation, I cut across the pavement and onto the dirt track. The change in terrain was jarring. My bike bounced and slid on the loose surface, and it took every ounce of skill I had to keep it upright. But I could hear the SUV struggling behind me, its tires spinning in the dirt. The trail wound through dense forest, branches whipping past my helmet. I had no idea where I was going, but anywhere was better than being caught by those goons. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the trees thinned out. I burst into a small clearing and skidded to a stop, killing the engine and lights. For a long moment, the only sound was my own ragged breathing and the ticking of the cooling engine. Then in the distance, I heard the faint rumble of the SUV's engine. It was moving away, back towards the main road. I'd lost them. For now. As the adrenaline began to wear off, the reality of my situation hit me. I was lost in the mountains in the dark with a group of armed men hunting me, and I still had no idea what was in the package that was worth all this trouble. With shaking hands, I pulled the small parcel from my bag. It was about the size of a paperback book, wrapped in brown paper and sealed with tape. For a moment, I considered opening it, but no, I'd gotten myself into enough trouble already. I tucked the package back into my bag and pulled out my phone. No signal, of course. I was on my own. As I sat there in the darkness, trying to figure out my next move, I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. When I'd started this job, the biggest risk I thought I'd face was rush hour traffic. Now here I was, playing courier for what was probably some high-stakes corporate espionage or worse. I knew one thing for certain. After this, I was definitely asking for a raise. Assuming, of course, I lived long enough to collect it. With a sigh, I kicked my bike back to life. The headlight cut through the darkness, illuminating a faint trail leading deeper into the woods. I had no idea where it went, but it was away from the men with guns, and that was good enough for me. As I rode into the unknown, the package a constant weight against my back, I couldn't shake the feeling that this night was far from over. Whatever was in that little parcel, it had turned my simple delivery run into something far more dangerous and oddly exhilarating. One thing was for sure: being a motorcycle courier would never be boring again. Story 9. The porch light flickered ominously as I pulled up to the darkened house, the warm aroma of pepperoni and cheese wafting from the pizza box on my passenger seat. Little did I know this routine delivery was about to plunge me into a nightmare that would challenge everything I thought I knew about the quiet suburbs I called home. My name's Alex, and I've been a food delivery driver for the past 2 years to help pay for college. I've seen my fair share of weird customers and sketchy situations, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened on that chilly autumn night. It was just past 10 p.m. when the order came in: a large meat lover's pizza and a 2-liter of cola to be delivered to 1542 Maple Street. Pretty standard stuff. The address was in one of those cookie-cutter suburban neighborhoods where all the houses look the same and everyone's lawn is perfectly manicured. As I navigated the winding streets, a sense of unease began to creep over me. The neighborhood was unusually quiet even for a weeknight. No kids playing in yards, no dog walkers, not even the usual glow of TV screens from living room windows. It was as if the entire street had been abandoned. I pulled up to 1542, double-checking the address on my phone. The house was completely dark, not a single light on inside or out. Weird, but not unheard of. Maybe they were trying to cut down on their electricity bill. I grabbed the pizza and soda, making my way up the front walk. That's when I noticed the note taped to the door. My heart skipped a beat as I read the hastily scrawled message: "Delivery person, leave food in backyard. Do not ring bell or knock. Payment under mat." Red flags immediately went up in my mind. In all my time delivering, I'd never been asked to leave food in a backyard. It went against company policy, not to mention common sense. But curiosity got the better of me. I lifted the welcome mat, and sure enough, there was an envelope with exact change plus a generous tip. I stood there for a moment, debating what to do. The smart move would be to leave, to trust my gut and get out of there. But the rational part of my brain argued that it was probably just a quirky customer who didn't want to be disturbed. Plus, they'd already paid. What was the harm in following their instructions? Taking a deep breath, I made my way around the side of the house. The backyard was enclosed by a high wooden fence, and the gate creaked loudly as I pushed it open. The sound seemed to echo in the eerie silence. As I rounded the corner of the house, my blood ran cold. There, in the shadows of the backyard, I could make out multiple figures huddled together. They were perfectly still, as if frozen in place. I nearly dropped the pizza as I fumbled for my phone, desperate to use it as a flashlight. As the beam illuminated the yard, I realized with horror that the figures weren't people at all. They were mannequins. At least a dozen of them, arranged in a loose circle, their blank faces all turned towards me. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. This had to be some kind of sick joke, right? A Halloween prank gone too far? That's when I heard it, a muffled sound coming from inside the house. I swung my phone's light towards the back door, and that's when I saw her. A woman's face pressed against the glass, her eyes wide with terror. She was mouthing something, but I couldn't make it out. Instinct took over, and I rushed to the door. It was locked, but the woman was frantically gesturing for me to try the window next to it. With shaking hands, I managed to slide it open. "Help us," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Please, you have to help us." "What's going on?" I asked, my own voice barely above a whisper. "Who's us?" "My family," she replied, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "We're being held hostage. He made us order the pizza, said he was hungry." A chill ran down my spine. Who's holding you hostage?" Before she could answer, a man's voice boomed from somewhere inside the house. "Emily, who are you talking to?" The woman's face drained of color. "You have to go," she hissed. "If he catches you here, he'll kill us all." I stood there, frozen in indecision. I couldn't just leave them, but what could I do? I was just a pizza delivery guy, not some action hero. The sound of heavy footsteps approaching snapped me out of my paralysis. Without thinking, I shoved the pizza box and soda through the window. "I'm calling the police," I whispered to the woman. "Just hang on." I sprinted back towards the gate, my heart feeling like it was about to burst out of my chest. As I reached my car, I heard an enraged roar from the house, followed by the sound of breaking glass. With trembling fingers, I managed to dial 911 as I peeled out of the driveway. The dispatcher's calm voice was a lifeline as I sped away from the house, constantly checking my rearview mirror to make sure I wasn't being followed. The next few hours were a blur. Police swarmed the neighborhood, and I found myself recounting my story over and over to various officers and detectives. It turned out the family, a couple and their 2 kids, had been held captive for days by an escaped convict who had broken into their home. The pizza order had been a desperate attempt by the father to get help. He'd hoped the delivery person would notice something was off and alert the authorities. I'd almost missed the signs, and the guilt of that realization weighed heavily on me. As dawn broke, a detective approached me with an update. "We got him," he said, his face grim but satisfied. "The family's safe, thanks to you, if you hadn't called when you did." He didn't need to finish the sentence. I knew how close it had been. In the days that followed, my story was all over the local news. People called me a hero, but I didn't feel like one. I kept replaying that night in my mind, thinking of all the things I could have done differently. What if I'd left when I first saw the note? What if I'd been too scared to look in the backyard? I couldn't shake the image of those mannequins in the yard, their blank faces somehow accusing. Why had they been there? The police told me later that the captor had a twisted fascination with dolls and mannequins. He'd forced the family to arrange them in the yard as some sort of sick game. For weeks after the incident, I jumped at every shadow, scrutinized every delivery address for signs of danger. The suburbs I'd once found boring now seemed full of hidden threats. Behind every perfectly painted front door could be unspeakable horrors. I tried to go back to my normal routine, but delivering food had lost its innocence. Every darkened house, every unusual request from a customer sent my heart racing. I found myself imagining worst-case scenarios with every delivery. About a month after that night, I received a letter. It was from Emily, the woman I'd seen at the window. She thanked me for saving her family, for having the courage to investigate when something seemed off. Her words were kind, but they couldn't erase the trauma of that night. In the end, I decided to quit my delivery job. The constant anxiety wasn't worth it, but the experience changed me in ways I'm still trying to understand. I became more observant, more attuned to the subtle signs that something might be wrong. I volunteered at a local crisis hotline, wanting to help others who might be in danger but unable to speak out. Sometimes late at night, I still find myself driving past 1542 Maple Street. The house looks normal now, a new family having moved in after the incident, but I can't help but slow down, scanning the darkened windows, half expecting to see a face pressed against the glass, silently pleading for help. The suburbs hold their secrets well, hiding darkness behind manicured lawns and cookie-cutter facades. But now I know the truth. Sometimes the most important deliveries aren't the ones we're paid to make, but the ones that fate thrusts upon us when we least expect it. As for me, I'll never look at a pizza delivery the same way again. And I'll always wonder about the stories hidden behind closed doors, the silent cries for help that go unheard in the quiet of the night. Because sometimes the real heroes aren't the ones who rush into burning buildings, but the ones who notice when something's not quite right and have the courage to act. Story 10. The moment I pulled that blood-stained shirt from the bin, I knew my quiet life as a garbage collector was about to get a whole lot messier. Little did I know it was just the beginning of a nightmare that would haunt me for weeks to come. My name's Jake, and I've been working sanitation in this sleepy suburban town for going on 15 years now. It's not a glamorous job, but it pays the bills and keeps me in shape. Most days, the most exciting thing that happens is finding the occasional unopened beer or maybe a magazine that's not too waterlogged. But all that changed on a crisp autumn morning last October. It was a Tuesday, just like any other. My partner Mike and I were making our usual rounds through the Oakwood Heights neighborhood. You know the type, manicured lawns, two-story houses with white picket fences, the kind of place where nothing bad ever happens. Or so I thought. We were about halfway through our route when we hit the Johnson residence. Nice folks always remembered our names during the holidays. Their bins were at the curb as usual, but something caught my eye as I hefted the first one. "Hold up, Mike," I called, setting the bin back down. Something's not right here. Mike, who was behind the wheel of our truck, leaned out the window. "What's the holdup, Jake? We're already behind schedule." I didn't answer him right away. Instead, I carefully lifted the lid of the bin and peered inside. That's when I saw it, a wadded-up mass of fabric, dark stains clearly visible even in the early morning light. With a gloved hand, I reached in and pulled it out. As it unfurled, my stomach dropped. It was a man's dress shirt, once white, now covered in large, rusty brown stains. Blood. No doubt about it. "Jesus Christ," Mike whispered, having come around to see what I was looking at. "Is that what I think it is?" I nodded, my mouth suddenly dry. "We need to call this in, Mike. This isn't right." But even as I said it, a nagging doubt crept into my mind. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. Maybe Mr. Johnson had cut himself shaving or something. It seemed ridiculous even as I thought it, but part of me wanted desperately to believe it. "Let's finish the route," I said finally, stuffing the shirt into a plastic bag I kept in my pocket. "We'll call it in when we get back to the depot." Mike looked at me like I was crazy. "Are you serious? That's evidence, man. We should call the cops right now." I shook my head. "And tell them what? That we found a dirty shirt? Let's not jump to conclusions. We'll finish up and then figure this out." Reluctantly, Mike agreed. We finished our route in record time, both of us on edge, jumping at every little noise. When we got back to the depot, I showed our supervisor, Bill, what we'd found. Bill's face went pale as he examined the shirt. "I'll call it in," he said, reaching for the phone. "You boys did the right thing bringing this to me." The rest of that day was a blur of police interviews and paperwork. By the time I got home that night, I was exhausted. But sleep didn't come easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that blood-stained shirt. The next morning, I half expected to be told to stay home, what with the ongoing investigation, but Bill called and said to come in as usual. "The police want everything to seem normal," he explained, just in case. So there I was, back on the road like nothing had happened. But everything had changed. As we drove through Oakwood Heights, I couldn't help but look at each house differently. Behind which of these perfect facades was a killer hiding? When we got to the Johnson house, my heart was pounding. The bins were out as usual, but this time a chill ran down my spine as I approached them. I lifted the lid slowly, almost afraid of what I might find. But it was just regular trash. Food scraps, junk mail, nothing out of the ordinary. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. That's when I noticed Mr. Johnson watching me from his front window. Our eyes met for a brief moment before he quickly closed the curtains. It could have been nothing, but in that instant I saw something in his eyes. Fear? Guilt? I couldn't be sure. The next few days passed in a haze of paranoia and second-guessing. Every bin I opened, every bag I tossed into the truck, I half expected to find more evidence of something sinister, but nothing turned up. It was the following Tuesday when things took another dark turn. We were back in Oakwood Heights, and as we approached the Johnson house, I noticed something odd. The curtains were drawn, which was unusual for this time of day, and the bins, they weren't at the curb. "Mike," I said, my voice tense, "something's not right." He followed my gaze and frowned. Maybe they're on vacation. But even as he said it, we both knew that wasn't it. The Johnsons never missed trash day. Ever. Against my better judgment, I found myself walking up the driveway. The house was eerily quiet, no signs of life within. I was about to turn back when something caught my eye, a dark smudge on the doorknob. My heart racing, I leaned in for a closer look. It was dried blood. "Mike," I called, my voice cracking. "Call the police. Now." What happened next is still a blur in my memory. The police arrived in force, cordoning off the area. They found Mrs. Johnson inside, badly injured but alive. Mr. Johnson was nowhere to be found. In the days that followed, the story came out in bits and pieces. Mr. Johnson had been embezzling from his company for years. His wife had found out and threatened to turn him in. The bloody shirt I'd found was from his first attempt to silence her. When that failed, he'd tried again and then fled. The police praised Mike and me for our alertness, saying we might have saved Mrs. Johnson's life. But I couldn't shake the guilt. If I had called it in immediately when I found that shirt, could I have prevented her second attack? Weeks passed, and life in Oakwood Heights tried to return to normal, but for me, everything had changed. Every house I passed, every friendly wave from a resident, now carried a shadow of doubt. What secrets were hiding behind those perfectly painted doors? It was a month to the day after finding the shirt when I saw him. I was on my route, alone this time as Mike had called in sick. As I turned onto Maple Street, I spotted a figure standing at the end of the cul-de-sac. Even from a distance, I recognized Mr. Johnson. He looked haggard, his clothes dirty and torn. Our eyes met, and for a moment time seemed to stand still. Then he turned and ran, disappearing into the woods behind the houses. My hand shook as I reached for my phone to call the police. As I waited for them to arrive, I couldn't help but think about how much my life had changed in just a month. I'd gone from a simple garbage man to someone embroiled in a manhunt for a would-be killer. The police searched the woods but found no trace of Mr. Johnson. They increased patrols in the area, but he was never seen again. Some say he fled the country, others that he died in those woods. Me? I'm not sure I want to know the truth. These days, I still run my route through Oakwood Heights. The Johnsons' house has new owners now, a young couple with a baby on the way. Life goes on, as they say. But every Tuesday as I make my rounds, I can't help but look a little closer at the trash I'm collecting. Because now I know that sometimes the most damning evidence of our darkest secrets ends up in the garbage. And me, I'm just the guy who picks it up. But I'll tell you one thing. I'll never look at a blood-stained shirt the same way again. Story 11. The jackhammer's rhythm pulsed through my body as I chipped away at the sun-baked earth. Just another day on the job, I thought. But as the ground gave way beneath my feet, I realized this was no ordinary workday. What I unearthed that sweltering afternoon would haunt me for years to come and make me question everything I thought I knew about the world around me. My name's Mike, and I've been in highway construction for the better part of 2 decades. I've seen my share of surprises buried beneath the asphalt, from colonial artifacts to lost wedding rings. But nothing could have prepared me for what I found that day. It was mid-July, the kind of heat that makes the air shimmer above the pavement. We were breaking ground on a new highway expansion project, turning a sleepy 2-lane road into a 6-lane behemoth to accommodate the ever-growing traffic from the city. I'd been at it for hours, the monotonous drone of machinery almost hypnotic in the afternoon sun. That's when my jackhammer hit something solid, something that didn't feel like the usual bedrock or debris we encounter. "Hey, Charlie," I called out to my supervisor. "I think I've hit something here." Charlie ambled over, wiping sweat from his brow. "Probably just an old pipeline or something. Let's take a look." We began clearing away the loose dirt, and that's when I saw it, a glint of metal that definitely didn't belong in the middle of nowhere, Oklahoma. As we dug further, the object began to take shape. It was sleek, almost organic in its design, with no visible seams or joints. About the size of a small car, it was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. "What the hell is that?" Charlie muttered, his usual gruff demeanor replaced by wide-eyed wonder. I shook my head at a loss for words. "I have no idea, but I don't think this is some forgotten piece of farm equipment." We called the rest of the crew over, and soon a small crowd had gathered around our discovery. Theories flew back and forth, everything from a downed satellite to a secret military project. But deep down, I think we all knew this was something beyond our understanding. That's when things started to get weird. I noticed Jim, one of our newer guys, hanging back from the group. His face was pale, and he kept glancing nervously at his phone. "Everything okay, Jim?" I asked, approaching him. He jumped at the sound of my voice. Yeah, everything's fine. I need to make a call." Before I could press further, he hurried off towards the portable toilets, phone clutched tightly in his hand. I turned back to the dig site, and that's when I saw it. A faint glow emanating from the object, pulsing like a heartbeat. I blinked hard, sure I was seeing things in the harsh sunlight, but when I looked again, the glow was still there. Guys?" I called out. "Are you seeing this?" The chatter among the crew died down as they all focused on the pulsing light. A hush fell over the site, broken only by the distant rumble of passing trucks on the old highway. Charlie was the first to snap out of it. "All right, everyone back up. Mike, call the office. We need to report this and get some experts out here." I nodded, reaching for my phone. But as I dialed the number, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. We had no signal, not a single bar. "Charlie," I said, my voice tight. "My phone's dead. Can you try yours?" One by one, each member of the crew checked their phones, all dead or without signal. That's when we heard the approaching vehicles. A convoy of black SUVs appeared on the horizon, kicking up dust as they sped towards our site. "What the hell?" Charlie muttered. "How did they get here so fast? We haven't even called it in yet." As the vehicles screeched to a halt, men in dark suits and sunglasses poured out. They moved with a purpose, quickly cordoning off the area around our discovery. A tall man with graying hair approached us, flashing a badge too quickly for me to read. "I'm Agent Thompson. This site is now under government jurisdiction. I'm going to have to ask you all to leave immediately." Charlie puffed up his chest, never one to back down easily. "Now wait just a minute. This is our work site. You can't just—" Agent Thompson cut him off. "I assure you we can. This is a matter of national security. You and your men will be debriefed and compensated for your time, but right now, I need you to evacuate the area." As the agents began ushering us away, I caught a glimpse of Jim being led to one of the SUVs. He didn't look surprised or confused like the rest of us. If anything, he looked relieved. We were herded onto a bus that seemed to appear out of nowhere. As we pulled away from the site, I watched through the rear window as a large tent was erected over our discovery, hiding it from view. The debriefing took place at a nearby motel. For hours, we were questioned individually about what we'd seen and heard. They were particularly interested in the glowing pulse I'd witnessed. When it was all over, we were made to sign non-disclosure agreements and told in no uncertain terms that discussing what we'd seen would have serious consequences. As we prepared to leave, I overheard two agents talking in hushed tones. "Third one this month. They're getting bolder. Or desperate. Either way, we need to contain this." Their words sent a chill down my spine. "Third one this month? What exactly were we dealing with here?" In the days and weeks that followed, I tried to go back to my normal routine, but nothing felt normal anymore. I couldn't shake the image of that strange object, the pulsing glow that seemed to reach into my very soul. I scoured the internet for any information about similar discoveries, but found nothing concrete. Just conspiracy theories and blurry photos that could easily be faked. Jim never came back to work. When I asked about him, I was told he'd transferred to another project. But something about the way our foreman avoided eye contact when he said it made me suspect there was more to the story. I started noticing other things too. Black SUVs parked on my street at odd hours. A clicking sound on my phone that wasn't there before. The feeling of being watched, even in the privacy of my own home. About a month after the incident, I ran into Charlie at the local bar. He looked haggard, with dark circles under his eyes. "You been sleeping okay?" I asked, sliding onto the stool next to him. He shook his head. "Can't shake the feeling that we saw something we weren't supposed to, Mike, something big." I nodded, understanding all too well. "Have you tried looking into it, finding out what it might have been?" Charlie's eyes darted around the bar before he leaned in close. "Listen, I've got a cousin who works for the State Department. He couldn't tell me much, but he did say one thing. Whatever we found out there, it's not the first. And it won't be the last." His words sent a shiver down my spine. "What does that mean, Charlie? What are we dealing with here?" He shrugged, downing the last of his whiskey. "I don't know, Mike. But I do know this. The world's a lot bigger and stranger than we ever imagined. And some secrets are buried for a reason." As I left the bar that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life had irreversibly changed. The solid ground I'd built my world on had shifted, revealing depths I never knew existed. In the months that followed, I threw myself into research, trying to piece together the puzzle of what we'd uncovered. I connected with others online who claimed to have had similar experiences. Some seemed credible, others less so, but all shared the same sense of having glimpsed behind the curtain of reality and being forever changed by what they saw. I never saw that strange object again. The highway expansion project was mysteriously canceled. The land fenced off and declared a protected habitat for some endangered species I'd never heard of. But sometimes, late at night, I swear I can still see that pulsing glow when I close my eyes. And I wonder about what lies beneath the surface of our world, waiting to be discovered. What other secrets are buried just out of sight, hidden by layers of earth and bureaucracy? One thing's for certain. I'll never look at a construction site the same way again. Because now I know that sometimes the most earth-shattering discoveries aren't made by scientists in labs, but by ordinary people in the most unexpected places. And once you've seen behind the veil, There's no going back to blissful ignorance. The truth is out there, buried beneath our feet. And sometimes all it takes is a jackhammer and a bit of curiosity to crack open the mysteries of the universe. Story 12. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing but an empty driver's seat and a still warm engine. In that moment, I knew this wasn't going to be an ordinary night patrol. Little did I know, it was about to become the most chilling experience of my entire career. My name's Officer Sarah Martinez, and I've been with the Highway Patrol for the better part of a decade. I've seen my fair share of strange occurrences on these lonely stretches of road, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened that moonless night in late November. It was around 2 a.m. when the call came in. Dispatch reported multiple calls about a man walking along Highway 16 just past mile marker 237. Now, pedestrians on the highway aren't uncommon, but at this hour in this remote area, something didn't sit right. I was about 15 minutes out, so I flipped on my lights. No siren, didn't want to spook anyone, and headed that way. The night was unusually dark, a thick blanket of clouds obscuring any moonlight. My headlights seemed to be swallowed by the darkness, barely illuminating the road ahead. As I approached mile marker 237, I slowed down, scanning the shoulder for any sign of movement. Nothing. I was about to radio back to dispatch when something caught my eye, a glint of metal just off the road. I pulled over, grabbing my flashlight before stepping out of the cruiser. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and something else, something metallic. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. My flashlight beam revealed a car, a late-model sedan, pulled off onto the shoulder. The driver's door was wide open, the engine still running. I approached cautiously, one hand on my holster. "Hello, this is Highway Patrol. Is anyone there?" No response. I peered into the car, half expecting, well, I'm not sure what, but all I saw was an empty interior, pristine save for a coffee cup in the holder and a phone on the passenger seat. I reached in and turned off the engine, pocketing the keys. That's when I noticed the phone screen light up with a new message. I know I shouldn't have looked, but instinct took over. The message simply read, "Where are you? Are you safe?" A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. Something was very wrong here. I radioed in my position and the details of the abandoned vehicle, requesting backup. Then, against my better judgment, I decided to take a look around while I waited. The beam of my flashlight swept across the ground, looking for any signs of where the driver might have gone. That's when I saw it, a trail of disturbed vegetation leading from the car into the woods that lined the highway. Every instinct screamed at me to wait for backup. But what if someone was hurt out there? What if every second counted? With a deep breath, I stepped off the asphalt and into the underbrush. The woods were eerily silent, no chirping insects or rustling leaves, just the crunch of my boots on fallen branches and my own rapid breathing. I tried to follow the trail, but it quickly became indistinct in the dense foliage. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding small and insignificant in the vast darkness. "This is Highway Patrol. If you can hear me, call out." Nothing, just the echo of my own voice fading into the night. I pushed on, going deeper into the woods. The trees seemed to close in around me, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. My flashlight beam bounced erratically off trunks and leaves, creating shifting shadows that played tricks on my eyes. That's when I heard it. A twig snapped somewhere off to my right. I whirled around, my hand instinctively going to my gun. "Who's there? Show yourself." For a long moment, nothing moved. Then, just at the edge of my flashlight's beam, I saw a figure. It was only for a split second before it ducked behind a tree, but it was unmistakably human. "Sir? Ma'am? I'm here to help. Please, come out where I can see you." Silence. I took a tentative step forward, my heart pounding in my ears. As I neared the tree, I steeled myself for whatever I might find. I stepped around the trunk, flashlight raised, and found nothing. Just empty forest stretching out before me. A wave of unease washed over me. Had I imagined it? Was the darkness playing tricks on me? That's when I heard it again. Movement, this time behind me. I spun around, and in the distance I saw a flash of pale skin disappearing behind another tree. "Stop! Police!" I broke into a run, crashing through the underbrush. Branches whipped at my face, roots threatened to trip me, but I pushed on. I could hear someone ahead of me, moving fast. Suddenly the trees thinned out and I found myself in a small clearing. In the center stood a figure, its back to me. Relief flooded through me. Finally, I'd caught up. "Okay, let's take it easy," I said, trying to keep my voice calm despite my ragged breathing. "I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to make sure you're all right." Slowly, the figure turned around. As it did, my flashlight illuminated its face and the world seemed to tilt sideways. It was me, an exact copy, down to the uniform and the wide-eyed expression of shock. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of hallucination, a trick of the light and my overtired brain. The other me took a step forward, its mouth opening as if to speak. But instead of words, a horrible, inhuman screech erupted from its throat. Panic overtook me. I turned and ran, no longer caring about direction or duty. I just knew I had to get away, had to get back to my car, back to reality. Branches tore at my uniform, roots seemed to reach up to trip me, but I didn't slow down. I could hear it behind me, that thing with my face, crashing through the woods in pursuit. I burst out of the tree line, the highway stretching out before me like a black ribbon. My cruiser was there, a beacon of safety in the night. I sprinted towards it, fumbling for my keys. Just as I reached for the door handle, a hand grabbed my shoulder. I whirled around, ready to fight, but found myself face to face with another officer. "Whoa, easy there, Martinez." It was Johnson from the next county over. "Dispatch said you called for backup. You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I stared at him, my mind struggling to process what was happening. Behind him, I could see other patrol cars pulling up, their lights painting the night in red and blue. I saw... I stammered, but the words wouldn't come. How could I explain what I'd experienced? Johnson's face softened with concern. "Hey, it's all right. Why don't you sit down for a minute? We'll take it from here." As if in a daze, I let him lead me to the passenger seat of my own cruiser. I watched as other officers began to investigate the abandoned car and the woods beyond. "Want to tell me what happened?" Johnson asked gently. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. How could I tell him about the figure in the woods, about seeing my own face staring back at me? They'd think I was crazy. Hell, maybe I was crazy. I'm not sure," I said finally. "I thought I saw someone in the woods, but I must have been mistaken." Johnson nodded, not pushing for more. "It happens to the best of us, especially on nights like this. Why don't you head back to the station, get some rest? We've got this covered." I nodded gratefully, too shaken to argue. As Johnson walked away to join the search, I sat there trying to make sense of what had happened. Had it all been in my imagination? A stress-induced hallucination? Or had I stumbled onto something in those woods, something beyond my understanding? I started the car, my hands shaking slightly on the wheel. As I pulled away from the scene, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was leaving something unfinished, some mystery unsolved. One thing was certain. I would never look at a call about a man walking along the highway the same way again. Because now I knew that sometimes the real danger isn't what you find, it's what finds you. Story 13. The rhythmic clunk of coins hitting the metal tray had become the soundtrack to my nights. But on that foggy October evening, as the same car passed through my booth for the third time, each pass with a different driver, I realized that the monotony of my job had just become a gateway to something far more sinister. My name's Sarah, and I've been working the graveyard shift at the Millbrook Turnpike for the past 2 years. It's not glamorous work, but it pays the bills while I finish my degree. Most nights blur together in a haze of loose change and bleary-eyed commuters. But that night is seared into my memory like a brand. It started around 1 a.m. The fog had rolled in thick, turning the world beyond my little booth into a swirling gray void. Traffic was light, as it usually is at that hour. I was halfway through my dog-eared copy of The Great Gatsby when I heard the distinctive purr of a high-end engine approaching. A sleek black Audi pulled up to my booth. The driver, a middle-aged man in an expensive suit, handed me a crisp $20 bill for the $5 toll. "Keep the change," he said with a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. Before I could thank him or offer change, he was gone, disappearing into the fog. I shrugged it off, not the first time someone had been in too much of a hurry to wait for change. I logged the transaction and went back to my book. About an hour later, I heard that same purr again. I looked up, expecting to see the Audi returning from wherever it had gone. Sure enough, there it was, same license plate and everything. But something was off. The driver wasn't the man in the suit. This time it was a woman, probably in her early 30s, with long dark hair and sunglasses, at 2 a.m., in the fog. "Evening," I said, trying to keep the confusion out of my voice. "That'll be $5. She wordlessly handed me a $5 and drummed her fingers on the steering wheel, clearly impatient. As soon as I raised the gate, she sped off. Now, I've seen my share of weird things working this job. People swap drivers all the time on long trips. But something about this didn't sit right with me. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, a primal warning system telling me something was very wrong. I tried to shake it off. Maybe they were siblings sharing a car. Maybe the first guy had picked up a friend. There were plenty of logical explanations. But a nagging voice in the back of my mind wouldn't let it go. I picked up my book again, but I couldn't focus on the words. My eyes kept darting to the road, waiting for something. I wasn't sure what. At precisely 3:17 a.m., I remember checking the clock. I heard it again, that same engine getting closer. My heart started pounding as the Audi emerged from the fog. This time, the driver was a young man, barely out of his teens. He had a nervous energy about him, his eyes darting around like he expected someone to jump out at him at any moment. $5, right?" he stammered, fumbling with his wallet. I nodded, not trusting my voice. As he handed me the money, I noticed his hands were shaking. And was that blood under his fingernails? Before I could get a better look, he shoved a crumpled $5 bill into my hand and hit the gas, not even waiting for me to raise the gate. It groaned in protest as he sped through. I stood there, frozen, the crumpled bill still in my hand. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I'd just witnessed. 3 different drivers, same car, all within 2 hours, each one more unsettling than the last. I reached for the phone, ready to call my supervisor or maybe even the police. But what would I tell them? That I had a bad feeling about a car that had passed through multiple times? They'd tell me to stop wasting their time. As I debated what to do, I heard something that made my blood run cold. The sound of multiple engines, growing louder by the second. Through the fog, I saw them. A convoy of at least 5 vehicles, all headed straight for my booth. The Audi was in the lead, but this time all the doors flew open as it screeched to a halt in front of me. 4 men got out, each from a different door. Their faces were grim, determined. And they were all looking right at me. My hand hovered over the panic button under my desk. One press and it would alert the police. But before I could make a decision, the man from the driver's seat approached my window. "Ma'am," he said, his voice calm but authoritative. He flashed a badge too quickly for me to read. "I'm Agent Carruthers with the FBI. I'm going to need you to come with us." My mind was reeling. FBI? What the hell was going on? I don't understand," I managed to stammer out. "What's this about?" Agent Carruthers glanced at his companions, then back at me. "I'm afraid that's classified, but I assure you it's a matter of national security. Now please, step out of the booth." I felt like I was in a dream, or maybe a nightmare. This couldn't be happening. Things like this didn't happen to toll booth operators in the middle of nowhere. But as I looked at the stern faces of the agents, at the other vehicles now surrounding my booth, I realized this was all too real. With shaking legs, I stepped out of the booth. Immediately, 2 agents flanked me, gently but firmly guiding me towards one of the waiting SUVs. As they opened the door, I caught a glimpse of someone already inside. It was the young man who had driven through earlier, the one with blood under his nails. He looked terrified. "Wait," I said, planting my feet. "I'm not going anywhere until someone tells me what's going on. I have rights." Agent Carruthers sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Ms. Thompson, I understand this is confusing and frightening, but I need you to understand the gravity of the situation. What you've witnessed tonight, it wasn't supposed to happen, and now we need to contain it." A chill ran down my spine. "Contain what? I didn't see anything." "You saw enough," he replied cryptically. "Now please get in the car. I promise everything will be explained in due time." As I was ushered into the SUV, my mind was spinning. What had I gotten myself into? What could possibly be so important that the FBI would shut down a toll booth in the middle of the night? The drive was long and silent. I tried asking questions but was met with stony silence from the agents. The young man next to me, I learned his name was Kyle, looked like he was on the verge of a breakdown. Finally, after what felt like hours, we pulled up to a nondescript building in what looked like an industrial park. We were led inside through a maze of corridors and into a sterile-looking conference room. Agent Carruthers sat across from us, his face grave. What I'm about to tell you is highly classified. Under normal circumstances, civilians would never be made aware of this information. But circumstances tonight have been far from normal. He took a deep breath before continuing. We've been tracking a group of foreign operatives who have gotten their hands on some sensitive technology. Technology that allows them to alter their appearance at will. My mind struggled to process what he was saying. Like shapeshifters? I asked, feeling ridiculous even as the words left my mouth. Carruthers nodded. In a manner of speaking, yes. What you witnessed tonight was an exchange gone wrong. The technology changing hands, quite literally. He went on to explain how the operation had been compromised, forcing the agents to adapt on the fly. The multiple passes through my toll booth were attempts to salvage the mission, with each driver being a different agent trying to track the technology as it changed hands. As the full picture emerged, I felt a mix of emotions: fear, awe, and a strange sense of excitement. The world was so much bigger, so much stranger than I had ever imagined. "So what happens now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Carruthers leaned back in his chair. "Now you have a choice. We can make you forget this ever happened. You'll wake up tomorrow thinking you had a vivid dream. Or, I prompted, my heart racing. Or you can join us. Help us fight threats most people don't even know exist. It won't be easy, and it won't be safe, but it will be important." As I sat there weighing the biggest decision of my life, I thought back to my little toll booth, to the monotony of my nights, the predictability of my existence. And I realized that, terrifying as it was, I had been given a gift, a chance to be part of something greater than myself. I looked at Carruthers, my decision made. "Where do I sign up?" He smiled, the first real emotion I'd seen from him. "Welcome to the team, Ms. Thompson. Your training begins now." As I was led out of the room towards my new life, I couldn't help but think about how quickly everything had changed. In the span of a single night, I had gone from a bored toll booth operator to a recruit in a secret war against shape-shifting spies. I knew the road ahead would be dangerous and unpredictable, but as I thought back to the fog-shrouded highway and the mysterious Audi, I realized that the monotony of my old life had been its own kind of danger, the danger of a life unlived, of potential unfulfilled. Whatever came next, I was ready for it. Because sometimes the most extraordinary journeys begin in the most ordinary of places, like a lonely toll booth on a foggy October night. Story 14. The figure stood motionless on the roadside, a dark silhouette against the midnight sky. As I slowed my truck, its head snapped towards me with an inhuman quickness. In that moment, I knew this night shift would be unlike any other. My name's Mike, and I've been working highway maintenance for the better part of 2 decades. Night shifts are part of the job, and usually they're uneventful. A bit of road repair here, some debris clearing there. But that night in late October changed everything I thought I knew about the lonely stretches of asphalt I'd come to call my second home. It was around 2 a.m., and I was doing my usual rounds on Highway 47, a long, winding road that cuts through miles of dense forest. The kind of place where your headlights seem to get swallowed by the darkness, and the trees loom over you like silent sentinels. I just finished patching up a nasty pothole when I saw it. At first I thought it was just another shadow, a trick of the light maybe, but as I drove closer, it took shape, a figure standing stock still on the shoulder of the road. Now, it's not uncommon to see the occasional hitchhiker or stranded motorist even at this ungodly hour. But something about this one set my teeth on edge. Maybe it was the way it stood, unnaturally rigid, or how it seemed to blend with the shadows around it. I slowed my truck more out of instinct than conscious thought. That's when it turned to look at me, its movement so sudden it made me flinch. I couldn't make out a face in the darkness, just a pale oval where features should be. Every horror movie I'd ever watched flashed through my mind. Every campfire story about hitchhiker ghosts and road specters, but I shook it off. I was a grown man, for crying out loud, not some scared kid. I pulled over, leaving a good distance between my truck and the figure. Standard procedure is to offer assistance to anyone on the highway, no matter how creepy they might seem. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out into the cool night air. "Hey there," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "You all right? Need any help?" No response. The figure remained motionless, facing me. I took a few steps closer, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. That's when things got weird. Just as my light should have illuminated the person's face, they moved, but not like a normal person would. One second they were there, and the next they were gone, like they'd just blinked out of existence. I swept my flashlight around wildly, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hello, where'd you go?" A rustling sound came from the woods to my right. I spun towards it just in time to see something pale disappear behind a tree. Now I'm not ashamed to admit it. I was scared. Every instinct was screaming at me to get back in the truck and drive away as fast as I could. But curiosity, that damned curiosity that's always been my weakness, got the better of me. "Hello?" I called again, edging towards the tree line. "I'm not here to hurt you, just want to make sure you're okay." Silence. Then another rustle, deeper in the woods this time. I hesitated at the edge of the forest. Going in there in the middle of the night, chasing after God knows what, it was a monumentally stupid idea. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone might be in trouble. What if it was just a scared kid or someone having a mental health crisis? With a deep breath, I stepped into the woods. The darkness seemed to close in around me, the beam of my flashlight barely penetrating the thick foliage. Every shadow looked like a lurking figure, every rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps. I pushed forward, my free hand brushing against rough tree bark as I tried to keep my bearings. "Hello, anyone there?" A twig snapped somewhere to my left. I whirled towards the sound, my heart leaping into my throat. For a split second I saw it, a pale face just at the edge of my light's beam. No features, just smooth, white skin. Then it was gone, ducking behind a tree with that same impossible speed. "Hey, stop!" I shouted, breaking into a run. I crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face. I could hear movement ahead of me, always just out of sight. My breath came in ragged gasps, fear and exertion taking their toll. Suddenly, the trees opened up into a small clearing. I skidded to a stop, my flashlight beam dancing wildly across the open space. There, in the center of the clearing, stood the figure. But now, in the unobstructed light, I could see it clearly. And what I saw made my blood run cold. It wasn't human, not even close. Its body was too long, too thin. Arms that hung down past its knees ended in elongated fingers tipped with wicked-looking claws. And its face, God, its face. Where there should have been eyes, nose, and mouth, there was only smooth, pale skin, like a mannequin brought to horrible life. I stood frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. The thing's head tilted to one side, regarding me with sightless curiosity. Then, slowly, impossibly, a seam appeared where its mouth should be. It split open, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. That broke my paralysis. With a strangled yell, I turned and ran. I didn't care about direction, didn't care about getting lost. I just knew I had to get away from that thing. Branches tore at my clothes. Roots seemed to reach up to trip me, but I didn't slow down. I could hear it behind me, moving through the woods with unnatural silence and speed. Just when I thought my lungs would burst, I burst out of the tree line. The highway stretched out before me, my truck a beacon of safety in the night. I sprinted towards it, fumbling for my keys. As I reached for the door handle, I made the mistake of looking back. There, at the edge of the woods, stood the creature. It made no move to follow me onto the road. It just stood there, that horrible mouth seam stretching into what I could only describe as a grin. I threw myself into the truck, slamming the door and locking it. My hands shook so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. As the engine roared to life, I risked one more glance at the woods. The thing was gone. I peeled out onto the highway, tires squealing. I drove well above the speed limit, constantly checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see that pale face pressed against the back window. It wasn't until I reached the next town, some 20 miles down the road, that I finally allowed myself to breathe. I pulled into a 24-hour diner, my hands still shaking as I cut the engine. For a long time, I just sat there, trying to process what had happened. Had it been real? Or had the long nights and lonely roads finally taken their toll, making me see things that weren't there? As the sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, I made a decision. I couldn't tell anyone about this. They'd think I was crazy, or worse, drunk on the job. No, this was something I'd have to carry with me. A secret of the night roads. We could give you a ride, help you find a mechanic. Another loaded glance between John and Sarah. Then, to my surprise, Sarah burst into tears. "Oh, thank God," she sobbed. "We've been out here for hours. I was starting to think we'd be stuck here all night." John put an arm around her, but I couldn't help noticing how stiff he seemed, how his eyes never quite met mine. "That's real kind of you," he said. "We'd appreciate that." As they gathered their things and got their kids out of the car, I headed back to our minivan to fill Lisa in on the plan. But as I approached, I saw her face through the windshield. She looked pale, her eyes wide with fear. I quickened my pace, my heart starting to race. "Lisa, what's wrong?" She rolled down the window, her voice barely above a whisper. "Dan, I think we need to leave now." "What? Why?" She glanced nervously at the family behind me. "While you were talking to them, I overheard something. The kids were arguing in the back seat, and one of them said something about sticking to the plan and not messing this up like last time. Dan, I don't think their car is really broken down." My blood ran cold as the implications of her words sank in. I turned slowly, trying to keep my face neutral as I watched the family approach our van. John was in the lead, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. Sarah followed, clutching the hands of their 2 children. But now, seeing them through the lens of suspicion, I noticed things I'd missed before. The tight set of John's jaw. The way Sarah's eyes kept darting to the surrounding desert as if looking for something or someone. My mind raced, trying to figure out our next move. We couldn't just drive off and leave them. If they really were up to something nefarious, that would only tip them off that we suspected something. But letting them into our car suddenly seemed like a monumentally bad idea. "Everything okay?" John called out, now just a few yards away. I forced a smile, buying time. "Yeah, just letting my wife know the plan. Say, before we head out, do you mind if I take one more look at your engine? I'm no expert, but maybe a fresh pair of eyes might spot something." John's face tightened almost imperceptibly. "Sure, why not?" As we walked back to their car, I tried to calm my racing heart. I had no idea what I was looking for, but I knew I needed to confirm Lisa's suspicions one way or the other. I peered into the engine compartment, pretending to examine the various components. That's when I saw it. A small device attached to the battery with wires leading to other parts of the engine. It didn't look like any car part I'd ever seen. "Find anything?" John's voice was casual, but there was an undercurrent of tension I couldn't miss. I straightened up, mind whirling. "No, afraid not. Looks like you'll need a real mechanic to sort this out." As I turned to face him, I saw his hand move to his waistband. My heart nearly stopped as I caught a glimpse of metal, a gun. "I'm real sorry about this," John said, his voice low. "But I'm afraid we're going to need to borrow your van, and you folks are going to have to come with us for a little while." Time seemed to slow down. I could see Lisa in our van, her face a mask of terror. Our kids, oblivious to the danger, still playing their handheld games. And this family, this dangerous, desperate family, standing between us and safety. In that moment, I made a decision that would change all our lives forever. "Okay," I said, raising my hand slowly. "Let's all just stay calm. Tell me what you need us to do." John seemed taken aback by my cooperation. "You're not going to fight this?" I shook my head. "Look, I don't know what's going on here, but I can see you're desperate. I've got my family to think about, so let's just figure this out without anyone getting hurt, okay?" Sarah approached, the kids in tow. "John, we need to go. Now," I could see the conflict in John's eyes, the desperation warring with what looked like genuine remorse. "All right, here's what's going to happen. You and your family are going to get in the back of your van. We're going to drive for a while. Once we're safe, we'll let you go, I promise." As we walked back to our van, my mind raced. I caught Lisa's eye, trying to convey a silent message. "Play along, don't panic." The next few minutes were a blur of action. Us piling into the back of our own van, John taking the wheel with Sarah beside him. Their kids sandwiched between ours, an awkward silence falling over us all. As we pulled onto the highway, I racked my brain for a plan. How could we get out of this? Should I try to overpower John at the next stop? Leave a message for someone somehow? but as the miles ticked by, something unexpected happened. The kids, all four of them, started talking. At first, it was just shy glances and whispered comments about video games, but soon they were chatting like old friends, the strange circumstances forgotten in that way only children can manage. I caught snippets of the conversation between John and Sarah in the front seat. Hushed arguments about the drop point and what if they don't show. It was clear they were in some kind of trouble, running from something or someone. Hours passed, night fell, and slowly a crazy idea began to form in my mind, an idea that went against every instinct of self-preservation I had. "John," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet hum of the engine. "I think it's time we talked about what's really going on here." He tensed, his knuckles whitening on the steering wheel. "I told you, once we're safe—" "No," I interrupted. "I mean really talk, because I think you need help, real help, and maybe we can do that." The van swerved slightly as John processed my words. Sarah turned in her seat, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and desperate hope. "You don't know what you're saying," she whispered. "You don't know what we're involved in." I took a deep breath. "Then tell us, because right now we're all in this together, and I think there might be a better way out than whatever you're planning." For a long moment, the only sound was the rumble of tires on asphalt. Then, with a heavy sigh, John began to talk. A story of debt, of threats, of one bad decision snowballing into an impossible situation. As the truth came out, I saw Lisa's expression soften, saw the fear in the other children's eyes, the weight of adult problems on such young shoulders. And I knew, crazy as it was, that we had to help them, not just for their sake, but for ours, because sometimes the most unexpected detours can lead us to exactly where we need to be. "Okay," I said as John finished his story. "Here's what we're going to do." As we formulated a new plan, one that involved police, lawyers, and a whole lot of trust, I couldn't help but marvel at the strange turns life can take. We'd set out for a simple family vacation and found ourselves in the middle of a thriller novel. But looking at the faces around me, my family and this other family brought together by desperation and chance, I realized that sometimes the most important journeys are the ones we never planned to take. The road ahead would be long and uncertain. But for the first time since we'd pulled over to help a stranded car, I felt a glimmer of hope. Because sometimes the very people you think are a threat can turn out to be the ones who need saving the most. And sometimes being a good Samaritan means more than just changing a tire. Sometimes it means changing lives.